The crystal chandeliers of the Vauxhall Gallery cast prism-like shadows across the polished marble floors. Asha Mehta adjusted her simple beige dress, a stark contrast to the sea of designer labels flooding the annual fashion-forward gala. Her calloused fingers betrayed years of actual sewing work, not just sketching designs like most attendees. Name, the hostess at the VIP entrance barely looked up from her tablet. Asha Mehta, I'm with Lumiere Designs. The name still felt foreign on her tongue, the fashion house that had plucked her from obscurity 6 months ago, offering her a junior designer position after seeing her graduate collection. The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. You're not on the list. That's impossible, I'm part of Victoria Beaumont's team. The mention of Victoria's name, Lumiere's creative director and fashion's reigning queen, caused a ripple of whispers among nearby attendees. Victoria, with her glacial beauty and calculating ambition, had transformed Lumiere from a staid heritage brand to the industry's boldest trendsetter. Wait, the hostess said, suddenly finding Asha's name. You're the pattern maker. Asha winced at the reduction of her role, junior designer. The pity in the woman's eyes stung worse than outright rejection as she was waved through. Inside, Asha navigated through fashion royalty, editors who could destroy careers with a paragraph, influencers whose outfit choices moved millions in stock value, and designers whose names had become verbs in the industry lexicon. Asha, you actually came, Dominic, Victoria's assistant, approached with air kisses. His eyes, though, betrayed genuine surprise. Victoria's over there with Xavier. Xavier Beaumont, Victoria's husband and Lumiere's CEO, stood by the champagne fountain, his arm possessively around Victoria's waist. Unlike his wife's dramatic flair, Xavier exuded old-money restraint in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. As Lumiere's owner and Asha's ultimate boss, he rarely visited the design floors. Gathering courage, Asha approached them, clutching her portfolio. Tonight, she would show Victoria her capsule collection ideas, concepts she'd stayed up refining until her eyes burned. Victoria, I brought those sketches you. Victoria turned, champagne flute in hand, her smile faltering. Asha, what a surprise. You asked me to bring my concepts for the sustainable line, Asha reminded her, ignoring the confused look passing between Victoria and Xavier. Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Darling, this is hardly the place. She turned to the circle of fashion elites surrounding them. Everyone, meet our newest little pattern drafter. She's quite enthusiastic. The chuckles that followed cut deeper than any scissors through fabric. I'm actually a designer, Asha corrected softly. Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Of course you are. She plucked Asha's portfolio from her trembling hands, casually flipping through pages of work that had consumed months of Asha's life. Oh dear, Victoria's voice carried deliberately. This is all very mall boutique, isn't it? The gallery erupted in poorly disguised laughter. Asha felt her cheeks burn as Victoria continued. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about your role, Asha. We hired you for your technical skills, not your creative vision. Xavier Beaumont watched the exchange with detached curiosity, saying nothing as his wife publicly dismantled Asha's dreams. She doesn't understand luxury, Victoria stage whispered to the group. Can you imagine these at Fashion Week? As Victoria passed the portfolio around like a joke to be shared, Asha stood frozen, humiliation crawling up her spine like ice water. When the portfolio finally returned, now stained with champagne and fingerprints, she clutched it to her chest like armor. Thank you for your feedback, Asha managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll remember it. As she turned to leave, she caught Xavier Beaumont's gaze, not pitying or amused like the others, but calculating, assessing. Something in his expression made her pause before she hurried toward the exit, the weight of public humiliation crushing her shoulders with each step. What she didn't see was Xavier leaning to whisper something in Victoria's ear, his expression hardening as his wife laughed it off with another sip of champagne. Asha's tiny apartment felt cavernous in its silence. She kicked off her sensible heels and collapsed onto her second-hand sofa, the night's humiliation replaying in brutal detail. This wasn't her first taste of fashion world cruelty, but it stung deeper coming from Victoria, her supposed mentor. 3 years earlier, Asha had been a completely different person. Growing up in a middle-class household where her father ran a small tailoring shop in Queens, she'd learned to sew before she could write her name. Fashion wasn't glamour then, it was livelihood, craft, heritage. After design school, while her classmates chased glamorous internships, Asha had built a modest but growing business making custom wedding dresses for women who couldn't afford designer prices but deserved beauty on their special day. That's where she'd met Priya Singh, her first real fashion world connection. Priya, a junior editor at Style Quarterly, had commissioned a wedding dress after seeing Asha's work at a local showcase. "This craftsmanship is extraordinary," Priya had said during a fitting, fingers tracing the hand-beaded bodice. "You shouldn't be hidden away in a queen's studio, you should be at a major house." What followed was a whirlwind, Priya featuring Asha's work in the magazine's Emerging Talent section, introducing her to industry insiders, and eventually to Victoria Beaumont herself when Lumiere announced a search for new blood. "Victoria's not just looking for talent," Priya had warned over coffee the day before Asha's interview. "She wants a protégé, someone to mold, play that angle." "But I already have my own aesthetic," Asha had protested. Priya's expression had turned serious. "Then hide it for now, get in the door, learn from her, then emerge with your vision later. That's how the game works." The interview with Victoria had gone brilliantly because Asha had followed Priya's advice, presenting herself as clay waiting to be shaped rather than an artist with her own vision. Victoria had hired her on the spot. "We'll create magic together," Victoria had promised, eyes gleaming with what Asha had mistaken for genuine excitement rather than the calculated acquisition of another asset. The first few months at Lumiere had been both exhilarating and demoralizing. Victoria's talent was undeniable, her eye for the next trend almost supernatural, but her methods were brutal. She cultivated a culture of fear, pitting designers against each other, taking credit for others' ideas, and publicly eviscerating work that didn't meet her standards. Asha had endured it all, learning, absorbing, waiting for her chance. She'd believed Victoria when she'd suggested Asha develop some concepts for their upcoming sustainable collection, had worked nights and weekends on the portfolio that now lay stained on her coffee table. The worst betrayal, though, had come from Priya. 2 months into her Lumiere position, Asha had discovered that Priya hadn't championed her out of belief in her talent, but as part of a deal with Victoria, social coverage in exchange for exclusive access to Lumiere's shows and celebrity fittings. "It's just business, Asha," Priya had explained when confronted, not even bothering to sound apologetic. "Victoria approached me after seeing your feature. She likes collecting people others discover, makes her look visionary. I needed the Lumiere relationship. Win-win." "And what do I win?" Asha had asked. Priya's answer still echoed in her head. "Experience, connections. If you survive Victoria, you can survive anything in this industry." Now, staring at her ruined portfolio, Asha wondered if survival was enough. She'd compromised her vision, endured daily humiliations, all for a chance at legitimacy in an industry that seemed determined to remind her she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic, Victoria's Rage Designing, says your portfolio inspired her to do better, throwing out the sustainable collection concepts from the team, starting fresh tomorrow. The subtext was clear. Victoria would be inspired by Asha's concepts while publicly dismissing them. A second text followed. Xavier asked for your file from HR, not sure why. Asha's stomach clenched. Getting fired after tonight's humiliation would be the final blow. She'd have to face her parents, admit defeat, return to the wedding dress business with her tail between her legs. She was about to throw her phone across the room when a final text came through, not from Dominic, but from a number she didn't recognize. The difference between fashion and style is knowing when to speak up. Your work deserves to be seen, not stolen. Xavier Beaumont. Asha stared at the message until her screen went dark, unsure whether it was a lifeline or another trap in an industry built on beautiful deceptions. The Lumiere headquarters buzzed with unusual energy when Asha arrived the next morning. Staff huddled in whispered conversations that abruptly halted as she passed. In the elevator, an intern from marketing avoided eye contact. You're trending, Dominic hissed, pulling her into the supply closet before she could reach her desk. He thrust his phone at her. The Instagram video already had over 200,000 views. Victoria, clearly tipsy, dramatically reading aloud from Asha's portfolio at an after-party, her voice mockingly simpering. Fashion should serve the woman, not sacrifice her on the altar of trends. The fashion elite around her howled with laughter as Victoria continued. Can you imagine? Serving women, how pedestrian. We don't serve, we elevate, we transform. Asha watched numb as the video continued, Victoria flipping through her sketches, inviting others to add their ridicule. Someone had drawn crude modifications on her carefully rendered designs. Another had spilled red wine deliberately across a page, announcing it improved the color story. It's not just Instagram, Dominic said quietly, it's everywhere. Fashion Truth picked it up, calling it the Cinderella designer who should have stayed home. Priya wrote a piece for Style Quarterly's website about ambition without talent. Priya, the betrayal felt fresh all over again. She was there last night after you left. Dominic couldn't meet her eyes. Look, Victoria's on the warpath. The sustainable collection presentation to the board is Friday, and she's claiming you tried to sabotage her by presenting subpar work intentionally. That's insane, Asha whispered. She asked me to bring those concepts. I know, but nobody's going to contradict her. He hesitated. There's more. She's called an all-staff meeting at 11. Word is she's making an example of you. The all-staff meeting was worse than Asha could have imagined. The entire company, designers, marketing, sales, production, gathered in the showroom where Lumiere normally presented collections to buyers. Victoria stood on the small stage, elegant in a white pantsuit that matched her icy demeanor. Innovation requires vision, Victoria began, her amplified voice silencing the murmurs. At Lumiere, we don't follow trends, we create them, which means I cannot tolerate mediocrity masquerading as talent. On the massive screen behind her, Asha's portfolio appeared, digitized and enlarged for maximum exposure. This, Victoria gestured dramatically, was submitted as a serious proposal for our groundbreaking sustainable collection. This provincial, bargain basement aesthetic from someone who clearly misunderstood both her role and our brand. The room remained uncomfortably silent, not the laughter Victoria had enjoyed the night before. I'm sharing this as a learning moment, Victoria continued, unperturbed. Excellence isn't just encouraged at Lumiere, it's required. Asha Mehta will be returning to the pattern department where her technical skills can be useful without her creative limitations causing damage. Asha stood frozen among her colleagues, feeling their sidelong glances, some sympathetic, most carefully neutral. Career suicide in fashion could be contagious. Furthermore, Victoria smiled thinly, I'll be personally overseeing the sustainable collection, inspired by what not to do. The familiar rage of being stolen from while being insulted boiled up inside Asha. Before she could stop herself, she called out, You mean you'll be stealing my concepts while publicly ridiculing me? The room went deadly silent. Victoria's smile hardened. Excuse me. The silhouettes you mocked last night, the zero-waste pattern cutting you ridiculed, I saw the notes you made on your copy. You're taking everything while pretending to dismiss it. Security appeared at the door, summoned by Victoria's almost imperceptible nod. I think Ms. Mehta is having some sort of breakdown, Victoria said with theatrical concern. Perhaps the pressure of the industry isn't suitable for everyone. As security approached, a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. Let her speak. Xavier Beaumont stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Victoria faltered momentarily before regaining composure. Darling, this is a creative issue, not a business matter. When my creative director publicly humiliates a staff member using company resources, it becomes a business matter. Xavier's voice remained even as he moved through the crowd to stand beside Asha, especially when that creative director is demonstrably stealing ideas while claiming they're worthless. The murmurs resumed, louder now. Victoria's face flushed beneath her perfect makeup. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately, she suggested. No, Xavier said, you chose a public forum for this conversation. We'll finish it here. He turned to Asha. Ms. Mehta, I believe you were making a point about intellectual theft. With Xavier's unexpected support bolstering her courage, Asha pulled out her phone, opened her email, and projected it onto the screen, replacing the images of her portfolio with something far more damning. 3 weeks ago, I emailed these concepts to Victoria for preliminary feedback, Asha explained, her voice growing stronger. She returned them with dismissive comments, but the document properties show she spent 6 hours with them and created a duplicate file. The evidence was irrefutable: timestamp data, edit history, duplicate files saved under Victoria's personal drive with Asha's concepts marked for adaptation. The room erupted in chaos as security stood confused, looking between Victoria and Xavier for direction. "Remove her," Victoria shouted, pointing at Asha. "No," Xavier countered calmly. "Remove everyone else. This meeting is concluded. All staff except Ms. Maida and my wife are dismissed until further notice." As shell-shocked employees filed out, Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. "You can't possibly be taking her side," she hissed at her husband. "She's nobody." Xavier's expression remained impassive as he responded just loudly enough for those still within earshot to hear. "That's where you're wrong, Victoria. She's the future of Lumiere. You're its rapidly fading past." The Lumiere headquarters fell into an eerie silence after the staff's dismissal. In the vast showroom, only three remained: Asha, still trembling with adrenaline; Victoria, her rage barely contained behind a brittle smile; and Xavier, whose calm demeanor belied the corporate earthquake he'd just triggered. "This is absurd," Victoria finally broke the silence. "You're willing to destroy everything we've built because a pattern maker feels underappreciated." Xavier motioned for Asha to sit at the long conference table dominating one end of the showroom. He removed his suit jacket and draped it carefully over a chair before joining her. "Victoria," he said with practiced patience, "join us, please." Victoria remained standing. "I won't dignify this farce." "Then you'll miss the revelations." Xavier pressed a button on the table console, and the room's lighting shifted to presentation mode. The screen that had displayed Asha's portfolio now showed a grid of security camera footage, the design studio over the past 6 months. "Asha isn't the first designer you've stolen from," Xavier stated matter-of-factly, addressing his wife. "She's just the first with the courage to challenge you publicly." He turned to Asha. "I've been investigating my wife's creative process for nearly a year. Your situation merely confirmed what I already suspected." Victoria's laughter held a dangerous edge. "Investigating me, your own wife, for what? Being a demanding creative director?" "For intellectual theft, hostile workplace creation, and brand endangerment," Xavier replied, turning back to the screen. "Design is collaborative, of course, but systematically taking junior designers' work, berating them publicly while privately mining their ideas, then driving them out once you've extracted value. That's not collaboration, it's parasitic." The footage showed Victoria's pattern: late-night raids of designers' desks, photographing sketchbooks, forwarding herself emails containing others' concepts, followed by brutal critiques of the same designers days later. Asha watched stunned as her own experience was contextualized within a larger pattern of abuse and theft. She wasn't alone, she was merely the latest victim. "You had me followed, spied on," Victoria's voice rose dangerously. "I'm your wife." "And Lumiere's creative director," Xavier corrected. "Two roles that should never have been conflated. My mistake." He turned to Asha. "Ms. Maida, I owe you an apology. I knew Victoria's methods were questionable, but I allowed it to continue because the brand thrived. That was morally and professionally inexcusable." Victoria stalked toward them, her heels striking the marble floor like daggers. "This little nobody comes in with her community college aesthetic, and suddenly I'm the villain. I made Lumiere what it is today." "Did you?" Xavier challenged, bringing up another screen, a financial dashboard showing Lumiere's performance. "Our sales have been declining for 3 consecutive quarters. Our sustainability initiatives rank last among luxury brands. The creative team has 78% turnover, almost 3 times industry average." He turned to Victoria. "You've been coasting on your reputation while driving this company into creative bankruptcy." "The board won't stand for this," Victoria threatened. "They love me." "The board," Xavier replied calmly, "received this presentation yesterday." He indicated the evidence surrounding them. "They've unanimously voted to remove you as creative director, effective immediately." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You can't fire me, I'm your wife." "I'm not firing you as my wife," Xavier said, his voice finally betraying emotion. "Though that discussion is forthcoming, the board is removing you as creative director." Asha sat frozen, witnessing the implosion of fashion's most powerful couple, a dynasty crumbling before her eyes. Xavier turned to her. "Ms. Maida, I'd like to show you something else." Another document appeared on screen, Asha's complete employment file, alongside a separate folder labeled Independent Tracking. While Victoria was dismissing your ideas publicly, I had our innovation team analyze them privately. Your zero-waste cutting techniques would reduce our material costs by 22%. Your biodegradable sequin concept tested successfully in our lab. Your adaptive luxury proposals opened markets we hadn't considered. He turned to face her directly. You weren't hired as a pattern maker who overstepped. You were hired as a designer with extraordinary potential, then deliberately sidelined and mined for ideas. Victoria laughed bitterly. So this is your plan, replace me with her, the board will never. The board, Xavier interrupted, has already approved a restructuring of the creative department. No single director with unchecked power, a collaborative team approach with transparency and attribution. He turned back to Asha. Ms. Maida, we'd like you to lead the Sustainable Innovation Division with full credit for your work and a seat on the Creative Council. Before Asha could respond, Victoria's composure shattered completely. You ungrateful bitch, she screamed at Asha. I gave you an opportunity when nobody knew your name. You owe me everything. Actually, Asha found her voice. You took everything while giving nothing. There's a difference. Xavier stood. Security will escort you to clear your office, Victoria. Your access has been revoked effective immediately. As security reappeared at the door, Victoria gathered the remaining shreds of her dignity. You'll regret this, both of you. Perhaps, Xavier acknowledged, but Lumiere will survive. Your reign of creative terror won't. As Victoria was led away, Xavier turned to Asha. The question now, Ms. Maida, is whether you're willing to help rebuild what my wife nearly destroyed. Asha looked around the empty showroom, the space where her humiliation had reached its peak just hours earlier, now offered to her as a canvas for redemption. Why me? She finally asked. There are more experienced designers. Experience didn't save Lumiere from Victoria's toxicity, Xavier replied. Courage might. You showed that today. He paused. Plus, your designs are genuinely revolutionary. Sometimes outsiders see opportunities the establishment misses. Asha considered his words, the weight of the moment pressing on her. This wasn't just about personal vindication, but transforming a toxic culture that hurt countless creative people. I have conditions, she said. Xavier nodded. Name them. 3 days after the showdown, Asha sat in Xavier's sprawling corner office, surrounded by evidence that would have been unimaginable a week earlier. The glass conference table was covered with documents, financial reports, design archives, employee exit interviews, and legal affidavits, all painting a damning picture of Victoria Beaumont's reign at Lumiere. 17 designers in 5 years, Xavier said, pushing forward a stack of resignation letters, all citing hostile work environment, all signing NDAs that Victoria insisted upon, which I foolishly approved. And all with similar stories of theft, added Diana Chen, Lumiere's normally reserved legal counsel. Victoria would critique their work publicly, then incorporate elements privately without attribution. Asha examined the pattern, so similar to her own experience, yet systematized to a degree she hadn't imagined. Victoria hadn't just been a difficult boss, she'd created an elaborate machine to extract creativity from others while maintaining her own mythology. The NDAs are problematic, Diana continued. They create potential liability if we acknowledge the pattern publicly. I don't care about liability, Xavier replied, surprising both women. I care about correcting a systemic wrong. The door opened and Marcus Jones entered, Victoria's former assistant who had preceded Dominic and left under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier. Thank you for coming, Marcus, Xavier said, standing to shake his hand. Marcus nodded tersely, clearly uncomfortable being back in the Lumiere offices. I wasn't sure I should. The NDA is void in cases of workplace harassment, Diana interjected, which this clearly was. Marcus turned to Asha. You're the one who finally stood up to her. Asha nodded, more like I was backed into a corner where I had nothing left to lose. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. That's how she operated, isolated her targets until they either broke or left. He placed a flash drive on the table. I kept records, screenshots, recordings, documentation of stolen designs with timestamps. I knew someday someone would need them. Xavier picked up the drive. Why didn't you come to me directly? She was your wife, Marcus said simply, and you never seemed to notice what was happening right under your nose. The rebuke hung in the air. Xavier didn't deny it. I was a coward, he finally admitted. I saw the signs but chose to believe Victoria's explanations. The brand was thriving, acclaim was pouring in, and I convinced myself the human cost was standard for the industry. His honesty surprised Asha. In fashion, admitting failure was nearly taboo. Diana connected Marcus's flash drive to her laptop. The screen filled with damning evidence, Victoria taking photos of designers' sketchbooks after hours, forwarding herself emails containing others' concepts, followed by meeting footage where she presented those same ideas as her own original creations. Most disturbing were the text messages between Victoria and Priya Singh at Style Quarterly, revealing their arrangement. Favorable coverage in exchange for Victoria feeding Priya inside information on designers whose careers she wanted to destroy. She weaponized the fashion press, Asha whispered, seeing her own name appear in texts from the previous month. Victoria and Priya planning how to build Asha up, use her, then discard her once her ideas had been extracted. It wasn't just theft, Marcus explained. It was psychological warfare. Make designers doubt themselves, isolate them from peers, then push them to breaking point where they'd leave voluntarily, NDA in hand, career in tatters. Xavier turned to Diana. Are these records admissible? For internal purposes, absolutely, the lawyer confirmed. For external use, it's complicated, but combined with the company's own security footage and documentation, we have an irrefutable case. The door opened again. This time it was Dominic, looking nervous but determined. The board members are assembled in the main conference room. Xavier gathered the most crucial documents. It's time. Asha hesitated. Should I be part of this? You're central to it, Xavier replied. Your courage created this moment. Besides, the board needs to hear directly from the designers Victoria targeted. The boardroom fell silent as Xavier laid out the evidence methodically, clinically. The systemic theft, the psychological manipulation, the brand damage, the potential legal liability. Marcus and 3 other former designers testified to their experiences, their stories forming a devastating pattern impossible to dismiss. Finally, Xavier turned to Asha. And most recently, Victoria targeted Ms. Mehta, whose sustainable design innovations represent exactly the direction Lumiere needs to move toward. Innovations Victoria publicly mocked while privately planning to steal. The board members, mostly older men from finance and business backgrounds, looked uncomfortable but convinced. Where is Victoria now? Asked Roland Kessler, the board chairman. At home, I presume, Xavier replied. Her access credentials were revoked as per emergency protocol when intellectual property theft is detected. She's released a statement, Dominic interjected, holding up his phone. The screen showed Victoria's Instagram post. A black-and-white portrait with a lengthy caption claiming she was taking a creative sabbatical to recharge her legendary vision after years of carrying Lumiere's legacy while being unappreciated. The audacity was breathtaking. She's rewriting the narrative already, Asha observed. It won't work, Xavier said firmly, not this time. He projected the financial data showing Lumiere's declining sales, increasing costs, and vanishing market share in key demographics, all while Victoria's personal brand had flourished. The truth, Xavier concluded, is that Victoria Beaumont has been slowly killing Lumiere while building her personal empire on stolen creativity and psychological abuse. Roland Kessler cleared his throat. The evidence is compelling, Xavier. What are you proposing? A complete restructuring of Lumiere's creative approach, Xavier replied. No single director with unchecked power. A collaborative council with transparency, attribution, and ethical safeguards. He handed out folders containing detailed proposals, including Asha's original sustainable collection concept now expanded into a complete departmental reorganization. Ms. Mehta to head sustainable innovation, Marcus to return as design operations director, each with direct board reporting lines to prevent future abuse. The room fell silent as board members reviewed the materials. Finally, Roland looked up. And what about you, Xavier? You were complicit through inaction. Xavier nodded, accepting the criticism. Which is why I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations while this restructuring occurs. I'll return in a support capacity once new leadership is established. The board exchanged glances, clearly shocked by his willingness to temporarily relinquish control of his family's company. All in favor, Roland asked. The vote was unanimous. As they left the boardroom, Asha felt stunned by the speed of transformation. 3 days ago, she'd been publicly humiliated, her career seemingly in ruins. Now she stood at the threshold of an opportunity she'd never imagined possible. It's happening, she whispered to Marcus as they walked back to the executive floor. Justice usually doesn't in this industry, he replied. Enjoy it. Xavier caught up with them. There's one more thing. He led them to Victoria's former office, a shrine to her carefully curated image, walls lined with magazine covers featuring her face, awards bearing her name, photographs with celebrities and fashion luminaries. Clear it, Xavier instructed the waiting facilities team. Every trace. By tomorrow, this space will be the Sustainable Innovation Studio. As workers began dismantling Victoria's monument to herself, Asha realized the final proof wasn't just in documents or testimonies, but in this symbolic reclamation of space, physical and creative, that Victoria had tyrannically controlled for years. The fashion empire she had built on others' backs was being systematically dismantled, making way for something potentially revolutionary, a design house built on collaboration rather than exploitation. Are you ready for this? Xavier asked Asha quietly. She watched as Victoria's image was removed from the wall, revealing the clean white surface beneath. I've been ready my whole life, she answered. Victoria Beaumont's downfall unfolded with the same dramatic flair that had characterized her rise. For 2 weeks after her removal from Lumiere, she maintained a careful public narrative of voluntary departure and creative renewal. Her Instagram remained a curated fantasy of luxurious recuperation, oceanside meditations, and sunset reflections on authentic creativity. Behind the scenes, however, the carefully constructed empire was imploding. Asha learned the extent of the collapse during her first official Creative Council meeting. The newly formed leadership team gathered in what had once been Victoria's private atelier, now transformed into a collaborative studio space, Victoria's mirrored vanity replaced by a sustainable materials library. Vogue has pulled her cover feature, announced Ramon, the newly promoted communications director. They're replacing it with an industry expose on creative attribution. The Fashion Federation is reviewing her Designer of the Decade award, added Marcus, checking his tablet. 3 former assistants have come forward with evidence that the collections that won her the recognition were primarily created by uncredited junior designers. Xavier, who had taken a secondary role as promised, nodded from his position at the side of the room, and financially. Diana, the legal counsel, frowned at her notes. Her personal brand is hemorrhaging partners. The fragrance line with LVMH is on hold pending investigation. The fast fashion collaboration has been canceled entirely. Most significantly, her investors are questioning discrepancies between reported design team size and actual payroll. Meaning, Asha asked. She claimed large design teams to justify development costs while actually using a skeleton crew and pocketing the difference, Diana explained. Potential fraud. The scope of Victoria's deception extended far beyond Lumiere. She had built a personal empire using the same exploitative methods, stealing ideas, claiming credit, and constructing an elaborate myth of singular genius that the fashion world had eagerly consumed. What about her supporters in the industry? Asha asked, thinking of Priya Singh. Abandoning ship, Ramon replied. Style Quarterly has placed Priya on leave pending investigation into ethical breaches. Most notable influences are deleting their fawning posts about Victoria rather than risk association. The speed of the collapse was breathtaking, a testament to how quickly fashion's devotion could transform into disavowal when power shifted. By the 3rd week, Victoria's carefully managed public persona had cracked completely. Page 6 reported that she'd been seen screaming at restaurant staff in the meatpacking district. Blind items suggested substance abuse issues and explosive fights with publicists trying to salvage her reputation. Then came the leaked audio, Victoria, clearly intoxicated, berating her remaining assistant, They're nothing without me, that immigrant nobody stealing my position, that traitor husband, those ungrateful parasites who built nothing. The slur against Asha's background demolished what remained of Victoria's industry support. By month's end, Victoria Beaumont, once fashion's untouchable queen, had become a case study in hubris and downfall. Asha took no pleasure in watching the implosion. Each revelation only confirmed how deeply toxic the industry's power structures remained, how easily talent could be exploited, credit stolen, and abuse normalized in pursuit of the myth of genius. "Don't look so troubled," Xavier commented, finding Asha alone in the studio late one evening, sketching modifications to her sustainable formalwear concepts. Victoria engineered her own destruction. "It's not her I'm thinking about," Asha replied, setting down her pencil. "It's the system that enabled her. How many others like her are still out there? How many talented designers are being crushed under similar regimes?" Xavier considered this as he studied her sketches. "Many," he finally acknowledged, "which is why what we're building here matters beyond Lumiere." The sustainable collection was proceeding under Asha's direction, not as a token green capsule as Victoria had intended, but as a fundamental reimagining of luxury fashion's relationship with both environment and workforce. "The press is calling tomorrow," Xavier reminded her. "They'll want a statement about Victoria." Asha nodded. The fashion media had been circling for weeks, hungry for her perspective on the woman who had publicly humiliated her before such a dramatic reversal of fortune. "I'm not interested in personal attacks," Asha said firmly. "I want to talk about the future, collaborative design, ethical production, true sustainability beyond marketing buzzwords. And if they push for gossip, then I'll remind them that real innovation is always more interesting than scandal." Xavier studied her thoughtfully. Victoria would have used this moment to destroy a rival completely. "I'm not Victoria," Asha replied simply. "That's rather the point." The final blow to Victoria's empire came not from Lumiere or the press, but from the industry's financial backbone. Major luxury conglomerates began auditing their own creative departments, implementing attribution systems and anonymous reporting channels for intellectual property concerns. Victoria's personal investors withdrew en masse after forensic accountants discovered systematic financial misrepresentations. By week 6, Victoria Beaumont, the woman who had built her legend on the broken careers of countless designers, found herself professionally radioactive. Her name, once fashion shorthand for visionary brilliance, became synonymous with exploitation. The most telling sign of her fall came in the form of a courier delivery to Lumiere's reception, Victoria's Industry Awards, returned by her publicist with a note explaining that Ms. Beaumont wishes to step back from public recognition during this period of creative renewal. The truth, as industry insiders knew, was that the Fashion Council had quietly requested their return pending their investigation. Xavier placed the box of awards in the company archives rather than disposing of them. "A reminder," he explained to the Creative Council, "of what happens when we value individual glory over collective integrity." As Victoria Beaumont's carefully constructed world collapsed completely, Lumiere began its renaissance, not through splashy campaigns or celebrity endorsements, but through a radical transparency about design attribution and production methods that sent ripples through an industry built on smoke and mirrors. The collapse of fashion's most celebrated tyrant wasn't just the end of an era. It was the painful but necessary beginning of something new. Spring in New York brought the familiar frenzy of Fashion Week, but within Lumiere's headquarters a different energy prevailed. The showroom that had once been Victoria's personal stage was transformed into a collaborative workspace where Asha and her team finalized the sustainable collection that would mark Lumiere's rebirth. Final fabric tests came back from the lab, announced May, a textile engineer Asha had hired from an environmental innovation startup. The biodegradable sequins maintained structural integrity for approximately 1 year under normal wear conditions, then decomposed completely within 18 months in landfill environments. "And the carbon footprint analysis?" Asha asked, examining the shimmering material that looked indistinguishable from traditional plastic sequins. 87% reduction compared to conventional production methods, May confirmed, third-party verified. Unlike Victoria's secretive design process, Asha had implemented radical transparency. The studio walls displayed clear attribution charts showing which team member had contributed each element of every design. Weekly open studios invited craftspeople, environmental scientists, and even fashion students to contribute perspectives. The approach had initially raised eyebrows in an industry built on exclusivity and mystery. But as the collection took shape, industry insiders began taking notice, not with the fawning adulation Victoria had commanded, but with genuine curiosity about a fundamentally different approach to luxury. Vogue wants to feature the collaborative process rather than just the final collection, Marcus informed Asha, reviewing their growing press requests. They're proposing a documentary approach following the attribution system. Good, Asha nodded. The designs matter, but the process matters more if we want actual change. In the months since Victoria's departure, Asha had discovered that rebuilding wasn't just about creating beautiful clothes, but about dismantling entrenched systems that enabled abuse. Her team included several designers who had left or been forced out under Victoria's regime, their talents now flourishing in an environment that celebrated rather than exploited their contributions. Xavier, true to his word, had stepped back from direct creative involvement, focusing instead on implementing structural changes to prevent future abuses, anonymous reporting channels, mandatory attribution policies, and mentor protocols with clear boundaries. The waitlist for the apprenticeship program has reached 300 applications, he reported during their weekly check-in, most citing our ethical framework as their primary reason for applying. Any word from Victoria? Asha asked. Though she tried not to focus on the past, the specter of her former boss lingered. Xavier's expression tightened slightly. Divorce proceedings continue. Her legal team is getting creative with claims about intellectual property she allegedly brought to the marriage. Asha winced. Will that affect the collection launch? No, Xavier assured her. Diana has documentation tracing every concept to its original creator. Victoria's claims hold no weight legally, they're merely attempts to maintain relevance. Victoria had indeed been fighting desperately for relevance. After her industry collapse, she had attempted several comebacks, a planned memoir about surviving fashion's jealousy, a proposed masterclass series on creative leadership, even exploratory talks for a reality competition show. Each had fizzled when confronted with the growing evidence of her systematic abuse and theft. As Fashion Week approached, Asha focused not on Victoria's continued machinations, but on the 60-piece collection that represented Lumiere's new direction. Unlike the typical runway spectacle, they planned an immersive presentation where guests could interact with designers and craftspeople, examining construction methods and material innovations up close. Are you nervous? Marcus asked the night before the presentation, finding Asha making final adjustments to a zero-waste evening gown constructed from recycled fishing nets transformed into lustrous midnight blue fabric. Terrified, she admitted, her hands steady despite her words. Not about the collection itself, but about whether the industry is truly ready for change. They don't have much choice, Marcus observed. The old way is collapsing under its own toxicity. Victoria was just the most visible symptom. The presentation space bloomed to life the next morning, not with the typical sterile runway, but configured as a working atelier. Design tables displayed material development processes. Screens showed time-lapse videos of pattern-cutting innovations. Artisans demonstrated hand-finishing techniques to small groups of attendees. At the center, the collection itself hung on biodegradable mannequins, a symphony of innovative textiles and revolutionary construction methods that managed to be both ethically produced and breathtakingly beautiful. Fashion's elite arrived with the expected skepticism. Critics who had worshipped at Victoria's altar entered with thinly veiled suspicion. Influencers who had built careers mimicking Victoria's aesthetic looked uncomfortable in the inclusive space. Yet as they engaged with the process, touching the fabrics, speaking directly with craftspeople, understanding the design journey, something shifted. The whispers grew appreciative rather than critical. Phones emerged to document not just the clothes but the stories behind them. Is that Priya Singh? Marcus whispered, noticing Style Quarterly's former fashion director hovering uncertainly near the entrance. Asha nodded. After being placed on leave during the Victoria investigation, Priya had eventually resigned, her reputation tarnished by revealed text messages showing her complicity in Victoria's schemes. Should I have security remove her? Marcus asked. Asha considered this, then shook her head. No, let her see what fashion can be without exploitation and cruelty. As the event reached its peak, Xavier appeared at Asha's side. The buyer's response exceeds our projections. Bergdorf's wants exclusivity on the zero-waste evening collection. Selfridges is proposing a 6-month installation featuring the production transparency model. In the press, unprecedented coverage, not just fashion publications, business journals, environmental magazines, even technology platforms interested in the material innovations. He paused. You've achieved something remarkable here, Asha, not just a successful collection, but the beginning of a movement. Asha looked around at the vibrant space, designers speaking proudly about their contributions, craftspeople demonstrating techniques passed through generations, scientists explaining molecular structures of sustainable materials, all coexisting in a creative ecosystem that honored rather than exploited each component. No, she corrected gently, we've achieved this, all of us together. In that moment, surrounded by the tangible results of collaborative vision, Asha realized the true rebirth wasn't just of Lumiere as a brand, but of a fundamental understanding of what fashion could be when stripped of ego and built on respect, for creativity, for humanity, and for the planet that sustained both. 1 year after Victoria Beaumont's spectacular fall, the fashion landscape had shifted in ways few industry veterans had predicted. The annual Fashion Achievement Awards, once Victoria's personal coronation ceremony, unfolded in the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dendur with a markedly different atmosphere. Where previous ceremonies had centered on individual genius and celebrity spectacle, this year's event highlighted collaborative teams and ethical innovation. Attribution rather than auteur worship dominated acceptance speeches. Sustainability metrics flanked traditional design accolades. Asha, seated with the Lumiere team, felt a strange sense of dissonance as she observed the transformation. The industry that had once enabled Victoria's abuses now embraced accountability with the same fervor it had once celebrated mystique. Performative evolution, Marcus whispered, nodding her expression. They're adapting to survive. Does motivation matter if the outcome improves? Asha countered. Ask me in 5 years, Marcus replied with a wry smile. The ceremony proceeded with the expected awards for established categories: ready-to-wear excellence, accessories innovation, campaign of the year. Lumiere received recognition for several team members taking turns at the microphone to acknowledge their collaborative contributions. As the evening progressed, the host announced a new category, the Ethical Innovation Award, recognizing fundamental advancements in fashion's relationship with people and planet. A hush fell over the audience as Lumiere's sustainable collection was announced as the inaugural recipient. Xavier squeezed Asha's hand as she rose to accept the honor. Standing at the podium, facing fashion's power brokers and tastemakers, Asha felt the weight of the journey, from humiliated pattern maker to industry changemaker in the span of a tumultuous year. This award recognizes more than a collection, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It acknowledges the possibility of transformation, not just of materials or silhouettes, but of systems and values. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, perhaps hearing the implicit criticism of their previous complicity. A year ago, I stood in a showroom being publicly ridiculed for suggesting that fashion could serve women rather than sacrifice them, that luxury could encompass ethical production and transparent attribution. She paused, allowing the memory of Victoria's mockery to hover in the air. Today, I stand before you not as a singular visionary, but as part of a collective that dared to imagine fashion freed from exploitation of people, resources, and creativity itself. She gestured to her team, seated together rather than segregated by hierarchy as was typical at such events. This collection exists because pattern cutters were invited to the concept meetings, because textile engineers collaborated with designers from day one, because craftspeople were partners rather than anonymous hands, because attribution was celebrated rather than suppressed. The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition of earlier awards, more spontaneous, perhaps more genuine. As Asha prepared to leave the stage, the host stepped forward with an unexpected announcement. The board of the Fashion Council has unanimously voted to present a special recognition this evening, the Fashion Transformation Award, acknowledging an individual whose courage fundamentally altered our industry's direction. A spotlight found Xavier in the audience. Xavier Beaumont for choosing ethical transformation over empire preservation, for establishing new standards of creative attribution and workplace dignity, and for supporting systematic change at profound personal cost. The audience rose in standing ovation as Xavier made his way to the stage, his expression betraying genuine surprise. The man who had once enabled Victoria's reign of terror had spent the past year dismantling the systems that made such abuse possible, not just within Lumiere, but through industry-wide initiatives promoting transparency and accountability. "Thank you," Xavier said simply when the applause finally subsided. "But this recognition belongs to those with the courage to speak truth to power when the cost was greatest." He turned to Asha, "To those who risked everything to stand for integrity when the easier path was silence." The unspoken presence in the room was Victoria herself. Since her professional implosion, she had largely vanished from public view. Rumors placed her in a luxury rehab facility in Switzerland, then at a spiritual retreat in Bali. Fashion gossip channels occasionally reported sightings, Victoria berating service staff at exclusive restaurants, Victoria attempting to launch small capsule collections that found no buyers, Victoria reaching out to former protégés who now refused her calls. Her absence from tonight's ceremony, once unimaginable, highlighted how completely power could shift in an industry built on perception. As the formal ceremony concluded and the networking portion of the evening began, Asha found herself approached by a steady stream of industry figures, some apologetic for their previous silence during Victoria's reign, others eager to associate with fashion's new ethical direction, a few genuinely interested in the attribution systems Lumiere had pioneered. Ms. Maida, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Priya Singh stood before her, noticeably less polished than in her style quarterly days. After her resignation, she had struggled to rebuild her reputation, eventually finding a position at a smaller digital publication focused on fashion sustainability. Priya Asha acknowledged, her tone neutral. "I've been hopping for an opportunity to speak with you." Priya's typical confidence had diminished. "To apologize." Asha studied the woman who had once facilitated her entry into Lumiere specifically to be exploited by Victoria. "For which part?" Priya winced at the directness. "All of it, using you as currency in my arrangement with Victoria, participating in the system that nearly destroyed your career, writing that hit piece when Victoria demanded it." "Why did you?" Asha asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Because that's how fashion worked," Priya admitted. "Access was everything in journalism. Victoria controlled access. I chose professional survival over ethics." She paused, until it wasn't really survival anymore, just complicity. The honesty surprised Asha. "What do you want from me, Priya?" "Nothing," Priya said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that what you and Xavier built at Lumiere, it's changing things. My new publication is implementing attribution requirements for all coverage. Designers must acknowledge their full teams to receive editorial placement." The conversation was interrupted by Xavier appearing at Asha's side. "We should prepare for the press briefing. Are you ready?" Asha nodded, turning back to Priya. "Thank you for the apology. Real change requires acknowledging what was wrong before." As they moved toward the press area, Xavier murmured, "Everything all right?" "Yes," Asha replied, "just another part of the industry attempting redemption." The press briefing was the evening's true purpose for Lumiere. After a year of rebuilding and the success of their first collection, they were ready to announce their next innovation, an open-source pattern library of zero-waste cutting techniques, free for any designer or brand to implement. "Isn't Lumiere concerned about competitors adopting your innovations?" asked a business reporter as Asha explained the initiative. "We're counting on it," she replied. "Climate crisis and labor exploitation aren't competitive issues, they're existential ones. The industry either evolves collectively or fails collectively." Xavier added, "Lumiere's value isn't in hoarding techniques that could reduce fashion's environmental impact. It's in constantly innovating beyond what becomes standard." As cameras flashed and questions continued, Asha felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with awards or recognition. The humiliated woman who had stood frozen as Victoria mocked her portfolio a year earlier had not only survived, but helped architect a fundamental reimagining of what fashion could be. The journey from that moment of public shame to this evening of industry transformation hadn't been about personal redemption or revenge against Victoria. It had been about something far more revolutionary, the dismantling of systems built on exploitation and the painstaking construction of something more humane in their place. Later that night, as the Lumiere team celebrated at a small restaurant in the West Village, designers, pattern makers, and executives sharing the same tables without hierarchy, Asha stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. New York stretched before her, the fashion capital still glittering with possibility despite its flaws. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages and press inquiries about the open-source initiative. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles against entrenched industry practices. Xavier joined her on the restaurant's small terrace. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was remembering something my father told me when I first started designing," Asha replied. "He said true craftsmanship isn't about the creator's name, but about making something that serves its purpose with beauty and integrity." Xavier nodded thoughtfully, a philosophy the fashion world is only beginning to rediscover. "With a long way still to go," Asha acknowledged. "But the direction is clear," Xavier countered. "You've ensured that." Inside the restaurant, the team had begun impromptu toasts, celebrating individual contributions to their collective success. Asha watched through the window as Marcus recognized a young pattern cutter whose technique had solved a particularly challenging zero-waste sleeve construction. "Shall we rejoin them?" Xavier asked. Asha smiled, turning away from the city lights toward the warmth of community that had replaced Victoria's cold tyranny. "Yes," she said, "the real work is just beginning." As she stepped back inside to the genuine celebration of collaborative achievement, Asha realized that true redemption wasn't found in awards or industry recognition, but in the creation of spaces where dignity and creativity could flourish together, where no one would ever again stand alone and humiliated while their work was mocked and stolen. The simple woman who had been publicly shamed had not just survived, she had helped reimagine an entire industry, and that, beyond any accolade, was the redemption that mattered most.